A journey through the history of men's ice hockey. The origin of ice hockey dates back to 400 years ago. However, even before the birth of Christ, hockey-like games were said to have been played throughout several regions, such as Rome and Egypt, just to name a few. There are many myths surrounding the original birthplace of hockey, and it still remains a mystery to many. Despite all of the myths as to where it was born, what we do know is that structured ice hockey emerged in Canada during the 1800s. The person responsible for bringing ice hockey to the forefront is a Canadian man by the name of Pierre Lapin. As the story goes, Lapin would walk across icy surfaces using a crooked stick to aid him in his walks. One day, as Lapin was walking across the ice, he swung his stick at a piece of frozen beaver bladder that he tripped over. The bladder, flying across the ice, landed just short of a little bay, which he envisioned as goalposts. It was in that very moment when Lapin discovered his idea of ice hockey. Pierre Lapin's crooked stick is a piece of hockey history. It is known as the first stick and resides in Toronto's Hockey Hall of Fame. Shortly after Lapin's discovery, the concept of ice hockey spread and many people began to take interest not only in Canada but in other regions as well, one being Europe. In the 17th and 18th centuries, ice hockey in Europe was chaotic and played with a lot of violent competitiveness. It was all about pride and the notion of being a man. Villages consisting of almost 100 players per team would compete against each other, many ending up hurt or seriously injured. Later, it was realized that there were too many players, and a rule limiting the number of players was devised to 30 players per team. It was known as one of the Halifax rules, rules that were implemented during the 1800s and considered the first rules of ice hockey. However, they were never written or formalized. There weren't any type of structured rules pertaining to ice hockey until 1877. In the late 1800s, the Montreal rules, otherwise known as McGill rules, came into effect. James Creighton from Nova Scotia was a student at McGill University. He brought along the idea of the Halifax rules with him. Creighton modified them, resulting in the McGill rules. These were the first set rules of ice hockey and were published in the Montreal Gazette on February 27, 1877. 2 years prior to the published rules, Creighton was accredited for putting together the first organized game of ice hockey, the first game in which the McGill rules were actually implemented. On March 3, 1875, Creighton and his team defeated the opposing team in 2 games. It was the first known game which was pre-announced. 2 named teams played on a confined ice rink. All of the names of the players were recorded as well as the score, and the game was played with a flat circular piece of wood. Ice hockey continued on the uprise. Several different organizations were also forming, including the National Hockey Association. In 1909, the National Hockey Association, otherwise known as the NHA, was formed. The NHA was a professional hockey league organization that consisted of Canadian teams and played their first game on January 5, 1910. Not long after, another established league, the Canadian Hockey Association, fell apart, and at that point the NHA was reorganized. In an attempt to gain revenue, the NHA changed the duration rules of hockey from 2 30-minute halves to 3 20-minute periods. Another rule soon followed, which changed the number of players on each side to 6 opposed to the original 7. Near the end of 1917, because of a shortage of players, the NHA was forced to postpone the league for the season. Team and arena owners met, collaborated, and discussed the idea of a new league. This meeting resulted in the formation of the National Hockey League. On November 26, 1917, the National Hockey League, otherwise known as the NHL, was formed, and their first game was played under the league the following month. Ice hockey ultimately made its way to the United States in 1893, and during the 1923-24 season, a franchise was granted to the first American team. The first 6 teams in the NHL were introduced in 1924, and they were all Canadian. Over the first several years, teams varied greatly and they were constantly changing. It was 26 years later when the 6 teams we know today as the Original Six were given the official Original Six title. The Original Six played until the 1967-68 season, when an expansion doubled the league size from 6 to 12 teams. Until the 1970-71 season, the teams played in a separate group. The original 6 teams consist of the Boston Bruins, the Detroit Red Wings, the Toronto Maple Leafs, the New York Rangers, the Montreal Canadiens, and my favorite team, the Chicago Blackhawks. Throughout the history of ice hockey, the Chicago Blackhawks have been successful in making history of their own. The Chicago Blackhawks franchise was established in September of 1926 when it was purchased by Major Frederick McLaughlin, a wealthy military man. McLaughlin originally bought the Portland Rosebuds of the Western Hockey League. However, when he realized that the Western Hockey League teams were incapable of competing with the National Hockey League, McLaughlin moved his team to Chicago, expanded it, and changed its name. Major McLaughlin had served with the United States Army in World War I and belonged to the 86th Black Hawk Division. McLaughlin liked the name of his division, and considering there was a Black Hawk who resided in the Midwest, the new team name was inevitable, the Chicago Blackhawks. On November 17, 1926, the Chicago Blackhawks played their first game in the Coliseum. The games were held there until 1928, when one of the largest NHL arenas of that time was erected, the Chicago Stadium. The Chicago Stadium was home of the Chicago Blackhawks until 1994, when yet another arena was constructed, the United Center, which is still home of the Chicago Blackhawks today. Since the birth of the Chicago Blackhawks, the team has had many accomplishments, including making history themselves. Their most recent accomplishment was on February 22, 2013, when they made NHL history by being the first team to go 16 games without a loss in regulation to open a season. Their streak came to an end at 17 wins in a row. The Blackhawks made history during the 1932-33 season when they hosted the first afternoon game in the history of the NHL. During the 1963-64 season, the Chicago Blackhawks came within 1 point of their division title in franchise history as they finished in second place. To date, there are 40 hockey players from the Chicago Blackhawks that are in the Hall of Fame. And finally, the Chicago Blackhawks are 5-time champions of the Stanley Cup, taking possession in 1934, 1938, 1961, 2010, and most recently in 2013, the same year that they made NHL history with the best opening season in history. The Stanley Cup has become the most anticipated competition in hockey. The Stanley Cup was named after a man, Lord Stanley, who at the time was the Governor of Canada. In 1892, Stanley purchased a 7x11 silver bowl, which was the first Stanley Cup. Professional hockey then became much more popular across North America, and in 1910, when the National Hockey Association took possession of the cup, it became the award for professional hockey leagues. Ultimately, the National Hockey Association folded, and the National Hockey League gained possession of the cup in 1926. In today's world of ice hockey, it is not about violent competition against other villages to prove their manlyhood. As with the traditional approach of ice hockey, the game still carries the same amount of intensity and genuine pride that is identical to the traditional approach. However, the enthusiasm is also matched with a drive to play the game in the true spirit of sportsmanship and healthy competition, with one goal in mind. As the Chicago Blackhawks state, they are one team with one goal, the Stanley Cup. And today, that is the goal of every professional hockey team. Go Hawks!